thought there were no more levels. There are. Levelless Part 2. Secret stuff. Shrimp gumbo. Shrimp dumpling. Universe. Inverse. Combat base. Combat base. We got all your bases. Self-defense. Pop defense.
So, without anybody into this, so there's a basic idea of what leg kind of controls over the other, but more so what we really want to focus on is that whether this is half guard, bottom side control, guard, back control, if I don't have the hip, I can't play guard. I can't sweep the person. It limits the ability that I can control and influence what happens with them, and limits the ability for some of my tacos to sweep. If I don't have the near forearm, I can't really escape. It limits the possibility of performing tacos, and then also limits the ability for me to look at getting back control or exposure from there. So again, the equation would end up being this. So I need to make sure that I have specific mobility of these positions. When people do a good job of restricting the movement of, right now, my right hip and my right femur, I typically am going to get stapled down in some kind of position, which limits that. So even in this kind of position, there's a degree of limitation of how much external rotation I can do. Here, I could be able to just externally rotate and open up my hips based off of what I have. However, when the floor gets in the way, it's going to limit some of those angles. So I can try to externally rotate my hip as much as possible, so therefore my below my knee can still be mobile. But again, if somebody is either laying on this in dead weight or pinching this or controlling this, my relative external rotation is going to be limited. So now, what I need to be able to have is have some degree of internal rotation of this hip. So again, when I get stapled down, the more internal rotation that I have of my right hip that allows my femur and my right leg to start to move will help me be able to, create more mobility, which then allows me to use different motor patterns of my own body against somebody else that influences what they can do. So without anybody in this picture right now, this could look like half guard. This could also look, if the person was on this side of me, like, side control. The relative position of the near hip in this place dictates what's going to happen, as well as regarding now the idea of where this will also escape, and my hook and my control will also play in what can actually move and control from this position. So if I have regular half guard with below my left knee to the outside of the person's right leg, this would be like a traditional half guard. If I have this up into this kind of position, I could be in like a Z guard kind of frame with also a grapevine from here. If I went back to my half guard, but then I go ahead and now pummel it to the inside of that person's right leg, so right around that shin, I could switch my feet and also start to look at lockdown. I could also, from this position, slide this all the way back up through towards the hip and get to this opposite side, almost like to an opposite half guard from this kind of position as well. One of the things though, is that realistically, if the person is orientated towards me, so their head and their chest is in line with my head and my chest, this is the way that we identify it as an odd front. So this person, more often than not, is going to either try to pass or smash pass or use some kind of submission control, where again, they're able to go ahead and either get arms kind of extended, head crunch for a head arm kind of choke, or start to get me flattened out and start to control my hip to increase their mobility. That's going to be one. If this was going to have the person facing away from me, so they'd be facing out slightly from here or have the shin over the top, this could be looking at a knee cut kind of pass. So this is what we consider the even front, where they're going out and away. So therefore they would have to go out to rotate back in, or in the case when they have the shin down, they can already start to be in this position where they're going to rotate back to come in to start to look at controlling my legs for leg locks. So we have an odd front and an even front, and we also have to remember in an even, essentially it's two. So now the second part of the even is always going to be an odd control. So the person has to either come back down and in, or rotate to come back down and in towards either far shoulder or whatever leg we're looking to control. So now, when we're in this kind of position, if I have the person squared up on me, I can go ahead and start to look at increasing my own mobility for motor patterns by now actually just switching my feet. So now this goes into one of the ways that we refer to either a bow or a latch, because we are now going to sacrifice some of that immediate control of this hip for increased mobility, or the potential for increased mobility of ourselves for those motor patterns. So realistically, that person can start to stand up more, or knee cut, or be able to have a little bit more of that mobility. Well, at that same time, we'll have that too. If the person chooses to stay down and in and still try to smash this out from here, it becomes a lot easier for me to now use below my left knee to bring this up, which is now going to allow me to still have a mobile hip of some degree of external rotation as well as internal rotation, as well as allow me to get their hips under or above my hips and more of their weight on top of me. So now I can off balance them, take them to the opposite side, or get them into a position where I can, be able to safely hold their weight. If I tried to keep this in that same position, it's just going to make it harder for me to be able to have the additional mobility of my hip to be able to easily off balance this person. By switching this though, it allows me to easily be able to get more of my knees towards my chest and allow me to get my hips again under my opponent and allow me to adjust to what I have to do. So the other nice thing about this is that when we start thinking about this position, is if the person does stand up, which is now going to give them that even front, it does allow me to essentially already have a transitional period where I can now already have a reverse de la Riva hook, as well as below my opposite knee, to help keep that connection, to allow me to transition to other pieces if I need to. Because more often than not, if we look at this again without anybody in this position, this could be butterfly guard. This could be a variation of butterfly guard if I sit to a hip. If I sit back, here's closed guard. Well, again, based off of the relative position of the person, this could also be some variation of X guard. This could be some variation of reverse X. So the only thing that's relatively changed is the person's orientation relative to my own mobility and also my motor patterns and my control. So as long as I can still be aware that fundamentally a lot of this stuff isn't significantly going to change, I just need to be able to be aware, where do I need more mobility if it's been restricted? How can I have more motor pattern control? So that way it allows me to be able to decrease the other person's possibility of doing different movements. That decreases their mobility, which puts them in a precarious spot or a possible platform for them to submit themselves. At which point now, if I'm able to do that, I can now start using other components of fitness, whether it's strength, explosiveness, relaxation, breathing, all of these other components to tie into this. So again, one of the things that we're just looking at right now is that if somebody, in the case where I need to off balance somebody's weight, like Corey, staying in a traditional half guard and possible some of these frames might be detrimental to me if I want to be able to have enough mobility to create either escape to either back to guard, or if I'm looking to either have a sweep, a taco, or a back take, I want to increase and put as many favorable elements into place for me as possible. So it's by simply just switching my feet and also making sure that I have good mechanics, again, of good ankle dorsiflexion. So now I'm not trying to do too much. If the person does try to come into me, it's now a much easier position of allowing me to bring my knee up towards my chest, which allows me to bring my shoulders and my hips back in line into this position, which is allowing me to keep my hips mobile, which will also be easier to off balance my opponent and allow me to put myself into positions to succeed.